Talking also with Ms. Denise Deming, who identifies as a communicator and a wellness therapist, and she's written some things about what she calls the Al-Rawi Nelson cockup, and she says it's bigger than the PNM. She's quoting somebody who has said that we are not sure if justice is even possible anymore. Good morning, good to see you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Very good to be here.
Well, good to see you. Let's get into it. Written this sort of a heart-rending kind of piece. It's gut-wrenching to read some of these things you're saying here, where you cast the society in dark terms.
If you look around, if you look at the headlines, if you walk the streets, we are in a dark place. And the only way we will come out of this dark place is if we take a collective approach led by the people who hold power. You know, when I look around, people are doing things that are just wrong, but there are no consequences. And then when we look at our politicians, and I mean all of our politicians, I get a sense that they too are just mired in a deep hole of darkness and things that cannot be solved. They cuss each other all the time. And so it is a dark place. And we have to find a way to pull ourselves out of this dark place.
You agree with the person saying, among other things, that we aren't sure if justice is even possible anymore in Trinidad and Tobago?
What wrenched my heart with that is that this person was murdered as a result of road rage. And their family member made this comment. It's an article that appeared in the Express. And that is deep, because the person is expressing hopelessness, that they do not expect justice to prevail. People do not believe in justice, do not believe that even if you went to court, would it matter? And the data is telling you that the length of time we take to solve any cases, the number of murders that are solved and so on, that tells you that something is wrong with the justice system.
That is just one symptom of where we're at. And what do you think would be sort of a natural consequence of that if more of us begin to think like that?
If more of us just stood up and used our power where we are, we may see a transformation. I'll give you a very simple example that I look at all the time. There are no consequences for bad driving. So what you have is people bully you on the street. So for example, just recently, I was at a traffic light and waiting for it to turn green, and the person behind me was popping. It is bullying. So when I talk about getting out of this dark place, we all have to find a way to get out. We all have to start following the rules. But what is the bigger issue is that the absence of consequences makes many of us feel that you don't have to follow the rules. You know, and this case, what we see here, to me, is an example of it happening at a high level. Yeah.
You call it a cockup. Let's explain that. Let's unpack that a bit.
All right. I am not a legal luminary in any way. I call it a cockup because of all the headlines that I've seen. Because if you do a little bit of research on how do they solve corruption, in any country, you solve corruption by having a whistleblower. But they've got a system and a process to identify who are the whistleblowers and what are the circumstances under which that whistleblower will be engaged. Why I call this a cock-up is that we don't have whistleblower legislation, which we should have. If we had had whistleblower legislation, this may have operated differently because you would have had an oversight mechanism. My reason for calling it a cock-up is that it's either the former AG was being, either he was just operating on his own, and in politics, you don't operate on your own, or he didn't know how to arrange for Vincent, and I'm really trying not to call people's names, or he didn't know how to arrange to get the information and get the witness to support him. So that is a cock-up. How could an AG not know? Or is it that the AG just felt that he was so powerful that he could override the system? And, to me, the hero in this is the DPP. And I respect that man, because it must be really hard to make the kinds of decisions that he had to make under the politicians that he's dealing with. So that's why I call it a cock-up.
Yeah, and you say it's an illustration of a cancer of corruption going on in the society. I want to If we could go back to, because in reading all the stuff that has been carried thus far in the week or so, the almost 2 weeks this matter has been running, you've been trying to find a sense as to how it came about, who went to who blew the whistle first, and from what I gather, it is that at some point Mr. Nelson went to Mr. Al-Rawi and said, look, I want to tell you something. This is what has been happening. And Mr. Al-Rawi acted on that to the point where this arrangement was put in place for him to become state's witness and the compensation for that. Reading Martin Daly on Sunday, and he's saying, well, Mr. Al-Rawi got in bed, so to speak, with somebody who was way more clever than he, and that landed us in the situation we have now. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars this man is claiming. Otherwise, he's not going to keep his end of the bargain. And there's this issue about the indemnity, whether it's foolproof or not, and it doesn't seem to be.
But, and you know, all of those details one day will come out in the court. And I don't know when that day is going to be. I don't think it's going to be very, very soon. But one day, all of that will be revealed. But what is clear to me is that the witness didn't really have a national interest at heart. The witness was simply trying to make money. When you look at the millions of pounds that has gone through, and it's not just the witness, there's several other people who were just in this to make money. I don't think there was national interest in this. I just want to go back a bit and say, when you look at the lead up to the 2015 general election, a theme of that was morality in public affairs, there was supposed to be a code of ethics that was supposed to be signed by parliamentarians and so on. So in the lead up, there was a lovely picture painted that we are now going to get rid of corruption. We are now going to be operating at an ethical level. We're going to be operating honestly. That was the theme of the lead up. So I can understand when early in this new administration, there was an attempt to get after the people who they thought were corrupt. And Vincent may have come and presented a good case. So that was a real opportunity. But unfortunately, it was not managed well. And the bad management of it now has led to the thing exploding and blowing up in their faces. So we have been told in the lead up to 2015 that morality in public affairs is what we're doing. We're changing the society. We're minimizing corruption. And I ask myself, 7 years later, what has changed? And I don't see that very much has changed. So that while Vincent was probably an excellent opportunity because of how badly it was managed, we now end up with confusion. And I just want to make the point that is how crooks are found out. You find somebody from within the corrupt activity and you get them on your side. You get them to go in court and to speak against or to provide the evidence. That is what happens. But what happens in other countries is that there is a mechanism for oversight. So it doesn't just derail and go into madness, as Rafiq Shah has said in his Sunday article. That we almost at a stage of total madness.
Yeah, and in the watch that it is coming out now, the Prime Minister is on record as saying, well, certainly my interpretation of what he said and what was reported of what he said is that, well, this is not a matter for the Cabinet.
Well, you know that the Cabinet is only the Prime Minister and the AG. So I don't know what he's trying to say there. We'll have to hear more from the Prime Minister. Talking about is not a matter for the Cabinet. That can't be, he thinks we're stupid. So. And it is the Prime Minister and the AG. And there's also a report about 4 ministers who were involved.
Well, yes, Mr. Al-Rawi said that he discussed it with the Prime Minister, 3 or 4 others. Is that how a decision like this is made? And so this didn't come to the Cabinet and say, well, okay, well, this is what I've found out. This is what has been, somebody has approached me on this, and how do we go about it? And that when a decision is taken to do what was done, that the Cabinet, as a Cabinet, doesn't know that this is what is being done in our name?
I am not surprised at that conclusion that the Cabinet doesn't know, because the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health and all that, they're not really the Cabinet. The Cabinet is, and legally it is, we only need the Prime Minister and the AG to form a government. So we know where the power lies. That is the power. That is the Cabinet. So anything else they tell me, I certainly won't buy. But other people may buy it and talk about the cabinet. No, but give me a break. Try again.
Yeah, and I think it was in the Sunday papers, some of the background to it, what was happening at Petrotrin, decisions being made to treat with some aspect of this thing in Petrotrin. At one point, a report said that the decision was taken by the board of Petrotrin, and then a report came out afterwards to say, well, the decision was taken by the board, but the chairman was not there at that meeting when the decision was taken. And if I could recall, then chairman resigned within weeks of his appointment, and I've always wondered why. And asked Mr. Andrew Jupiter. Maybe it's something is inside there. So it's so there are ripples of this thing that involve other people and other players, corporate entities in the state sector.
Which is why I say it is not just a PNM issue. It's a national issue. It is probably, in my lifetime, it is the biggest shameful issue that I have observed. And my generation, we really have a responsibility, because it is my generation just causing all of this disquiet. And we expect our young people to behave in a particular way, but we are not leading them in that way of honesty and integrity, even just respect, so that my generation, we have a lot of work to do. And I must say that my generation is still in power. So we have the opportunity to really implement changes. And there are two bits of things that we need to do. The whistleblower legislation needs to be put in place. And I know they're going to tell me it's the opposition and the that. Give me a break. If the opposition and the party in power cannot collaborate, then just go home. Because collaboration is what is required. The governance is not the party in power. When you talk about governance and you talk about government, you're talking about both the opposition and the party in power. So if they can't collaborate, it means they don't have an interest in the country. And I was talking about my generation just not living up to expectations, but while we still hold power. So we have the opportunity. We need to ensure that the whistleblower legislation is passed. We need to ensure that the procurement legislation is passed. It is interesting that the Minister of Finance removed legal fees from the procurement legislation. Had we had legal fees been part of procurement, there would have been an oversight mechanism, and these millions of dollars would not have been paid to a small group of persons. I know that all the lawyers will object to legal fees being part of the procurement system, but we have to stop this system in which lawyers become multimillionaires overnight. Yeah. And one of the reasons is that there is no oversight mechanism that says this is the value of what you're doing, so that they can charge anything. And if they know people in the right places, it's fine. They can do anything. And that is the thing that's wrong with our country. We have an absolutely beautiful country. We still have opportunities because of all the resources that we have, but we just have disgusting leadership. And I take responsibility because I am part of that generation that has brought us here and continues to preside over the negativity and all the horrible things that we're experiencing. So, Andy, I take responsibility. I'm not running for politics, but I will continue to speak out, because these things just have to be put right.
Let's talk a little bit more about when you say that we are collectively responsibility, and it's not acceptable to say to ourselves or to say to others, well, we don't discuss politics, because this is more than just politics. It's not, this is about governance. It's about acceptable behavior, something that may have gone wrong from in the morning, as the people used to say. And I've been trying to find out, how do people in the ruling party, how are they responding to this in terms of how they may see this having an impact on the party's image going forward? And nobody wants to talk about it.
Andy, I cannot speak on behalf of the party. I'm not there at all. I am an observer. I am a participant in this society. I mean, Andy, this society has given me all that I have, and I really worry that I will die sadly saying that this society has not moved to where it should go. So when I talk about we don't discuss politics, once you start to discuss politics, you hear them talk about them UNC. And there's an underlying thing there with them UNC about people who live south of the Caroni Bridge. We have to stop that, because you scratch any of us hard enough and up will come the other race. So we have to stop that. You have any Afro-Trinidadian who goes into the UNC, they try to kill them. So when I talk about that, we have to change that whole ethos and think differently, is we have to start being Trinidadians and think about the impact on the country. So if you pay a bribe for a driver's permit, that has an impact on the country. If you use your US funds inappropriately, that has an impact on the country. So those are systems and processes that we have to find ways to just reboot. And I say quite often, every problem Trinidad and Tobago has been solved somewhere else. So we don't have to bend the wheel. We simply have to analyze our culture, and we have to look at what works in other countries and see if we can take it here. The relationship that we're beginning to have with there is a good relationship because there's help that we can have there. And we can continue that kind of collaboration. But before we do that, we have to become Trinidadians and figure out, what does Trinidad need? Not I from South, you from North, you're a Northerner, you from Gary. That doesn't work. It's not even working between I'm a Tobagonian and you are Trinidadian. We belong to this place. So we need to ensure that all our action is taken with a level of integrity and in the interest of our country.
I know, but those things are fundamental. But if we have to use this as a means of probably shocking some of us out of this kind of stupor and this kind of slumber, and call for reckoning here, and call for some kind of explanation and some kind of undertaking to address what is happening. We go about doing that. We don't want to propose marching again, but how do we demand some answers and straight talking and more straight talking over what has transpired here? And there's another element of it in which the Attorney General, Mr. Al-Rawi, is saying that, well, he didn't make this decision on his own. He consulted these two eminent senior counsel, and he's called their names. One wonders whether how they're responding to that now. So he's putting us in that. So we tell you to do that. So it's not your responsibility alone.
Andy, this is a watershed because the number of people who are being called out and whose names are being put in the mud because of this, people are going to respond. Because remember, man acts in his own interest first, last, and always. So anybody who has been brought in will now at some point try to get their revenge. So I think that this is going to continue to be a nasty event. It's going to continue to occupy the headlines in the newspapers because this saying we have in Trinidad, mouth open and Tory jump out. Well, this is an example of it. So I think it's a great opportunity to reset our country. And if you look at all the other things that are happening, this is an opportunity for whoever is in power to reset, but they have to be able to be humble and to be able to speak to people in a way that we all understand and that we believe. And that's a big issue because we don't trust our leaders. So we'll see how it unfolds.
Yeah, and then what I'm curious about is that what was the fee for those two senior counsel to have given him the advice? And so that is a missing element from this as well. How much did they ask for to give him the advice that he said he went to seek from them, and that's on the basis on which he made this decision. So where do we go from where do we go from here? Or you think we'll blow it over and move on to the next?
No, I don't think this is going to blow over. I mean, up to me, I would call general elections because I don't know how you can get out of this one. And there's so many other things that I don't know how the party can get out of. So if I had to advise, I would suggest, listen, it's time to call the elections. But I know that's not going to happen because those MPs and their $78,000 a month, they won't be happy. They've planned things for 2025, so that's not going to happen. So I think the next thing, you said that we can't march and all of that. I think there are two things that need to happen. People need to continue to have a meaningful discussion about where we are and where we need to go. That needs to happen. And that needs to happen throughout our society. And I mean, it needs to happen on an individual basis. And then on a wider scale, I am not one of those who disagree with marching because I've seen what marching has done in this country. We refer to the Keith Noel one. We refer to the prior in the lead up to the 2015 general elections when 10,000 people presented a petition to the president and so on. So I certainly believe in people acting politically and acting and making their voice heard. So to me, it's two issues that we have to deal with. We have to have that mass response, and we also have to have the personal conversations and the personal rethinking of what we stand for and how can we make a contribution to the society so that we will have some legacy. I'm afraid at the moment, the legacy of my generation is not very good.
All right, thank you very much for talking with us on this, Denise Deming.
Thank you very much, Andy.